Kicking us off tonight is a very inspirational man who is going on to help many, many others. There were some difficult life experiences that Lindsay Wright thought for months about what to do with the fourth generation family farm. The uncertainty was adding to his depression, and in the end, the decision only took a few minutes to make once he started processing this with a counsellor to address his health issues that this was causing. Lindsay Wright is now the coordinator of the Southland Rural Support Trust and helping many farmers who may be feeling or going through something similar to himself. And he joins us now on Sarah's Country. Lindsay, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and congratulations on being put on a pedestal as a land champion in New Zealand and Farmers Weekly this week. I absolutely 100% back that. Let's talk about that particular moment where you realised the only thing to do was to lease out something that had been in the family for so many years.
It was a pretty big decision, Sarah, I have to say, and it was the culmination of a whole period of time. I think I'd been on the way down for about 6 to 9 months, feeling worse and worse and worse inside, and I'd like a heavy weight in my chest. I could almost feel like I couldn't breathe at times. It was so heavy and so physical, even though it was a mental problem. And when I finally accepted that I needed to get someone, went to the counsellor, that took a while of unpicking before the counsellor kept saying to me, so what are you wanting to do here? What are your options? And we had 4 options down on a piece of paper. And I couldn't make the decision because I wasn't making any money. So to put a manager on was going to cost me more. I didn't want to sell the farm, so I wanted to keep farming, or I could have leased it, and I could have stayed as I was. But even when I was at counselling, that was going around and around and around in my head every night. Each option had a positive and a negative about it. And so the thing with depression is that it's very difficult to make decisions when you're in that space. So I agonised for a while, and then she said to me one day, let's have a look at these decisions you've got here. Have you decided? And I said, no, I haven't. And then she said to me, tell me what you don't want to do. And I kind of thought, well, how do you mean? And she said, well, do you want to stay as you are? I said, no. So she said, well, cross it off the list. You don't want to do that. Then she said, do you want to sell? Now, 4th generation family farm, no pressure. No, didn't want to sell the farm. So I'm down to 2, leasing or put a manager on. Do you want to put a manager on? Well, I wasn't making money, so putting another $70,000 on the expenses wasn't an option. Take it off. And there we were with the one obvious solution was to lease. And I couldn't believe how easy it was to make the decision, but it took the help of somebody else to make it. And that was the key thing. Somebody else was there to help me step through.
I know we can carry on about your story because it's absolutely incredible, and there's some full-length, amazing articles in this week's Farmers Weekly about our land champions, of which Lindsay is one. But just whilst we're on this topic of age, Lindsay, I mean, the who you deal with the Southland Rural Support Trust is of all ages. Do you think that your age helped you, or was it a stage in life that you had to come to?
It was probably a help, but also the cause. We quite often do get people in the rural support clientele who have reached that kind of late middle age, and maybe the succession plan hasn't gone right, or they're just not quite sure where to go, or I've got a personal little hunch that maybe us blokes, we've got a great plan for life, and when we get to our 50s we suddenly think, well, maybe I'm not as successful as I thought I was going to be, but what am I going to do, because I've invested my life in this. So yeah, it certainly with the rural support work, it does help to be of an age where you've lost a bit of skin on the way through, and you can sit with somebody and say, I don't know how you feel, but I know what's causing it, and I can understand why it's causing it or making you feel like that. Yeah.
And also about the timing as well. I mean, you went through Rogernomics, like a lot of our viewers and listeners remember that intimately well. Do you think that things would have been different if you were farming in this particular climate versus then?
Yes, probably, because Rogernomics and me coincided with getting my first mortgage, and I mean that was a real lesson in life. I came home from the rural bank with a mortgage, wondering how if I was going to pay it off, and within a couple of months, Rogernomics had taken SMPs off. My income had halved literally, and my mortgage was the same, and I had to kind of make it work. So I learnt very early on that you just had to knuckle down and make do in some way if you're going to get through, and that stayed with me for nearly 25 years. And it was the good times in 2001 too that actually put me off my step, because things came right. I started to spend a bit of money, to do a bit of upgrading, and that was what started me on the downward slip when it went wrong. When those prices backed off, I ran out of money because I'd changed my spending patterns. And so, yeah, nowadays, I think nowadays is different. I'm almost pleased I'm not farming now.
Yeah. I think the thing is too, is that I'm just assuming that that sense of failure must have been terrible. And I say the word sense of because there was no failure, but it's really about putting your priorities around, your life. I mean, for you, your health, your marriage, your family, I mean, were they always at the top, or did you need to reprioritize through this to realize what life was all about?
It was a really tough process, because I felt like I had everything. I mean, up until that point where it went wrong, family was great, marriage was great, farm was going along, I thought, fine. And then when it went wrong, it was just so confronting, because you don't know what to do. And the problem with that depression is that it stops you making good decisions. Or if you make a decision and it's no good, you just reinforces in yourself, see, you can't make any decent decisions, so you're no good. And very quickly you start to doubt yourself. From going from hero to zero, it was about a 9-month period. It was that quick.
I liken the quote here that point of spilling my guts on the floor was a release valve. I think that we're always going to be processing our stuff for our whole life. But, if you hold it in, you know what it's like. But if you hold it in, anonymous in your body, it doesn't go well. So why do we think that we need to keep holding this stuff in and not processing it?
Stigma. It's the stigma of having to admit to somebody else that I'm not in a good space. And that is just so hard to do. Like I spent, I don't know how many years leading up to it, shifting sheep on the road, meet the neighbour, how you going? Good. And I wasn't good. But I kept saying it, and I kept saying it. And every time I said good, I felt a little bit worse, because I knew I wasn't telling the truth. And eventually I changed, and I thought, I can't say good anymore because I'm not. So I changed, and neighbour would say, how you going? I'd say, battling on, which was to him supposed to mean good. But to me, I wasn't lying, because I was really battling on. But I mean, I still hadn't admitted to anybody that things weren't going well. And so that going to that counsellor for the first time was just absolutely, it was so cathartic, because I just let it all out. I didn't realise how wound up I was until I couldn't even get the yes out. She asked me how I was, if I had some problems, and as soon as I started to say yes, I just broke, and that was it.
And then, of course, the turning point in this story and the journey that you're on now is answering the ad to establish the Southland Rural Support Trust. But Southland has so many adverse weather events, and of course, it's a different way of farming that people don't seem to understand a lot of the time. And I mean, the snowstorm striking Southland straight up as a coordinator must have been a full-on experience for you.
Yes, I can't deny that. We, as the trust, we'd started up in 2008, and I just joined up because I'd finished with farming. I'd leased, and I was looking for some things to do, and the ad came along. I put my hand up and said, I'm available if I'm any use to you. So that's how I got involved. In 2010, so that was the year I became chair, and that year I was elected chair 2 days after the stadium collapsed. And so it was the trust's baptism of fire, or baptism of snow, and as me going in as chair, it was like, wow, what am I doing here? But we learned a lot in a hurry. And so, it's just been a real learning curve, but also it's just so rewarding when you've come away from something like that and you know that you've made a difference, you've helped somebody. When they're under pressure like that, people aren't thinking straight, just as you aren't when you're in a depression. And so to be able to give people something to hang on to, a direction to follow, is just so fulfilling for us as rural support members, because we're not clever. We're just people that have been through life and we've maybe experienced it ourselves in the past. And if you have experienced it, then you can sit with somebody and listen and understand.
That sense of purpose is something that's so huge. And sometimes it could be the sense of purpose of achieving one thing that day and then the next foot in front of the other. And then it just builds and builds and builds from there. And one question that we get a lot is not so much what happens if I'm suffering, but how can I help others? And you're doing this on a regular daily basis. How do you navigate that first initial conversation and then actually follow up with it, as opposed to, how you going? Fine. And then that becomes about it, digging deeper and supporting for a longer term.
It's an interesting process, and to visit somebody on farm, or even if it's a telephone conversation, it doesn't matter, but you've got to establish a sense of trust and a sense of connection between you and the client. So a lot of the visit is actually just establishing who each of us are, what we're here to do, getting some trust, and then just saying, so what can we do to help? What's the situation? And let the person tell you what their situation is. I don't know their situation. They have to tell me before I can help them. And I mean, as I say, I'm not a clever person in any particular field, but to hear somebody's situation, the thing that the Rural Support Trust has is a lot of connections with the agencies, the people who are professionally trained to be able to help people. So we, after an hour and a half, can say to somebody in the conversation we've just had, you've mentioned maybe you need some help on the farm, or you've mentioned that finances aren't going well, or you've mentioned that you're really lying awake at night and can't deal with stuff anymore. So from that, we would suggest to them, should we get a farm advisor in? Would you like us to arrange a visit to a counsellor? Would you like us to get a financial advisor? And those kind of things. And it's getting people to find their own solutions, because if I find a solution for them, they're probably not going to listen. They've got to find their own solution. They've got to own their own solution so that they will then act upon it. And the thing that the Rural Support Trust does is help them step across that line to start the process.
And I think the thing I love the most about what Rural Support Trust do is that the turning point for a lot of people can be in the power of relatability, and those farmers that can actually have a yarn to you and go, you know what, mate, I've been there too. And that it's very daunting to go to a counsellor when you've got an attitude of, well, what the hell do they know about farming? They don't understand my situation, et cetera, et cetera. And just actually getting to the point of processing a situation, and the tools are the same regardless of the circumstances.
Well, there's two things that are really powerful. The first thing is recognising that somebody has got some problems and being able to say that to them. I can see that what you've got going on is really tough for you right now. So you recognise that they've got a problem. It's not my problem, it's their problem, and I see it. So I've got empathy for the situation. Then another most powerful thing you can do is say, what can I do to help? What can Rural Support Trust do? What can I do to help? It's just so simple, and keeping it down to that level. It doesn't have to be rocket science. You don't have to be an expert in mental health to talk about mental health. It's just another subject. And if we can all learn to add those extra questions in our day-to-day conversation, even if somebody hasn't got a problem, just learn to ask those open questions. What's been happening for you? Find out.
Yeah.
And then you get that conversation going, and that's where you find out what's really going on. How are they coping with the situation that's happening? And it's not jumping out of the car and asking the hard question straight away. And it's not even a hard question. It's about having the conversation that you would normally have with somebody when you are meeting them as part of your day-to-day, going about your business.
And it's that shutdown from overwhelm that we often talk about. And Doug Avery's highlighted it around those ways of dealing with one problem at a time. And can I strongly encourage any listeners and viewers, if you're worried about anybody, you pick up the phone and have a yarn to the likes of Lindsay or your coordinator in your area and say, look, I'm worried about so-and-so. They can't ring them directly. However, Lindsay, you can sit down and just get a list of things of that overwhelm and process one thing at a time, because realistically that's what happens when you're in that state, right?
Absolutely. And I can remember back at the depth of my process journey going through, I was so incapable of making a decision. I had my kitchen table covered in post-it notes, and each post-it note had one job on it, and it was the jobs were even down to going to get the paper, and my only rule for myself was that one of those post-it notes had to be gone by the end of the day. That's the level I'd got to, but I needed that kind of process just to tick things off one at a time until I could manage a full list of things to do. So it's a strange place, and when you look back at it, you wonder how you ever got there and what it was that brought you to that point. But you can get through it, and sometimes you just need a bit of help, and that's what Rural Support's for.
Do you know what? I honestly believe you get there because you've been ignoring it for so long. And I love the fact that this title of the article that features Lindsay Wright in this week's Farmers Weekly is called A New Lease on Life. And those sort of hard decisions can sometimes be the absolute game changer in the next chapter of your life. So please check out farmersweekly.co.nz, that amazing story featuring Lindsay Wright. I'm just going to say one of the key things when I was in an absolute bottom of bottom, I couldn't even check my voicemails. It was just too much. I think they got to, 30, 40, whatever. And so therefore the littlest things become the biggest things in your life. So if you're feeling like you're reacting to things that should be very, very simple for you to deal with on a daily basis, start to take a breath and a step back and actually start to analyze it. And there is all the support in the world. I have to say that. And start with the Rural Support Trust. Thank you so much to Lindsay Wright for joining us on Sarah's Country. And of course, Neil Wallace for bringing us that story as well.
This is Sarah's Country.